IB Nation, welcome to another edition of the Irish Breakdown podcast. It is Thursday and it is February 15th. And we're going to talk some Notre Dame football today, obviously. Lots to discuss today. I'm excited about today's show. It's going to be a fun show. We're going to talk about the Notre Dame 2024 football schedule, which we've kind of known for a little while who the two. I think Tim Priester I think he was the first one to report that it was going to be Army. And I think that was like a couple months ago. And obviously, when Notre Dame played in the bowl game, there was the talk about it then. So we've known for a while that Army was going to be the 12th opponent, but now we know when. We know the entire makeup of the 2024 schedule. So I'm going to dive into that today. And then after that, we're going to talk about the Notre Dame offensive line and just kind of where things are, what was lost, what returns, what's new, and what are the big questions surrounding the offensive line as we get ready for spring ball. And then, of course, I'll answer some of your questions. There were 11 questions that got in during the show. If some more come, I will try to get to those, but those will be a little bit harder. But a lot to talk about in today's show, and I'm looking forward to it. I need to, man, I'm telling you what, this calendar needs to hurry up and speed up because I can't wait we got our schedule. We can't release it yet, but we got the spring schedule. When that starts, I'm excited to get out there and see this team play. And just looking at 2012 schedule, I'm like, okay, I got some flights I got to schedule. I got some hotels I got to book, and we know everything we need to do now. So it's going to be a lot of fun, and I'm looking forward to it, and I'm very much looking forward to what we're going to talk about today. Now, before I do that, I do need y'all to give me 1 second. I need to plug my computer in because otherwise it will not make it through the entire show. So just give me one second. You know, I went through my whole pre-show checklist that I normally do, had everything checked off, and forgot to make sure the computer's plugged in because that's really never really an issue. So we're gonna have some fun with today's show. And Tommy, dude, don't start with me today, man. I'm not in the mood for you today, man. I love you, but no, not today. Let's have some fun with today's topics, guys. In spite of Tommy Guns, we're going to have some fun today. Tommy's my guy. He knows it. Let's start off with the schedule of the 2024 season, which is now official, and it's a very interesting schedule, and it's created a lot of just angst. I think Notre Dame fans, sometimes there's a group of us that just like to kind of find something to kind of be upset about and not be happy about and look for just something that's going to be it's just something to be upset about or something to be nervous about. And the schedule gets released and there's this flood of, oh my gosh, Notre Dame's going to have to go 12-0 to make the playoff. And I don't know if 11-1 gets us in and all this kind of panic. And it's just like, take a deep breath. Okay. Number one, it's going to be all right. This is a good schedule. I think there's a faulty assumption that just everyone in the schedule is going to take a step back and they're not going to be any good. We don't know the answers to that. And we're going to find all that stuff out. And there's a lot that's going to have to get proved out over the season. There's going to be somebody on the schedule we think is going to be pretty good that ends up not being as good as we think. USC was that team last year. And there's going to be teams in the schedule that right now we're looking at like, they're okay, or maybe they might be okay. They're going to be better than we expect. And that's going to be true. And that was Louisville last year. And overall, it's a schedule that's comparable. And so I was kind of looking at the schedule and I see a lot of the same people talking about how hard last year's schedule was, or how challenging last year's schedule was, talking about how this is a softer schedule. And I just kind of found that funny, and I'll dive into the reasons why to begin. But let's first bring up the Notre Dame schedule for the 2024 season as we talk through all this. And there it is. Obviously, Notre Dame kicks the season off on August 31st with a road game at Texas A&M. At home the next week against Northern Illinois. Then they play at Purdue, home against Miami of Ohio, home against Louisville. Then there's a bye week. Then they play Stanford on October 12th, kicking things back off. Travel to Georgia Tech. That is technically listed as a road game, but Georgia Tech is giving up the home game, and they're going to play it at Mercedes-Benz so they can make some more money. That's going to be interesting, but technically it is a road game. It's a little different than the Army or Navy games, in my opinion. Then, of course, October 26th, they're going to play Navy at MetLife in New Jersey. Then there's another bye week before they play Florida State. Then they're home against Florida State, as we said, on November 9th. Then they're home against Virginia. Then they travel out to the Bronx to play Army at Yankee Stadium on November 23rd, and then finish the season November 30th with a road game at USC. It's interesting when you look at this rivalry between Notre Dame and USC because it's one that Notre Dame has really, I mean, let's be honest, they've dominated that series in recent seasons, but the last time out USC out in LA didn't go very well for Notre Dame. They obviously lost 38-27. And so Notre Dame will look to get back control of that series, which obviously Notre Dame won 48-20 this past season, and Notre Dame has won 5 of 6 against USC, including Notre Dame's last 6 home games. Notre Dame at USC in recent seasons, obviously they lost in 2022, did not play in 2020. That game got canceled because of the COVID stuff. Won in 2018, lost in 2016, lost in 2014, 1-12 and 1-10. So it's been a mixed bag for Notre Dame out in LA. And so obviously that's going to be a very, very interesting game for Notre Dame as well this season. So let's dive into just an overview of the Notre Dame schedule. And I want to first talk about just the strength of the schedule. And I don't think this is a really tough schedule per se. I do think that this is going to be a tougher schedule than perhaps a lot of Notre Dame fans think that it's going to be. That's the one thing that I do think is different. I think that there's this assumption that certain teams are going to take huge steps back. And while I think some teams are going to take a step back, I do not, for example, I do not view Florida State as being a team that's going to go 13-0 again. I don't believe that to be the case, but I do think Florida State's still going to be a very good football team this year. And yes, last year was a bit of an anomaly from the 13-0 season, but let's not forget this is a team that was 10-3 the year before. So this is a team that has gone and reloaded again when it comes to the transfer portal. They're going to have plenty of talent on their football team this year. I absolutely think that Florida State's going to be a team that's going to be I think going to have every chance in the world to once again be a 10+ win team. Will they be 13-0, borderline playoff team? We'll see. We'll see. I mean, there's obviously work to be done for them, but I do like what Florida State brings to the table in regard to their potential for being a good team this year. I think there's some very challenging games. We talked about Texas A&M. I think Purdue's going to be improved, although I don't think that they're going to be a challenge. I think Louisville's still going to be pretty good. I think a lot higher of Georgia Tech than a lot of people do. I do expect a little bit of a bounce back from USC. We'll dive into some of these opponents more so as we get into the season or get into the offseason, and I'll break down kind of why I think some teams are going to be better maybe than some fans think. But I do think that this is a more challenging schedule, and the proof is kind of in the pudding, so to speak. Number one, we all have mostly agreed that the 2023 schedule was pretty challenging. It wasn't as tough as maybe we thought it was going to be preseason, but it ended up being a challenging schedule. In the final regular season record of Notre Dame's opponents, or excuse me, the final record of Notre Dame's regular season opponents last year was 81-69. That is a win percentage of, let me just do the math here real quick. So that is, what would that be? 150 games, right? So Notre Dame's opponents last year had a winning percentage in the regular season of 540, right? So let's mark that down. Then you look at Notre Dame's 2024 schedule, and their opponents went 84-70, which is a win percentage of 545. So if you just look at the win-loss record of Notre Dame's opponents, they play a schedule that had a better win-loss record than it did the schedule they played a year ago. Now, here's why I think that is. I think this year's schedule for me, you obviously have a team like Miami of Ohio, who's a MAC team that won 11 games. That helps. Florida State obviously went 13-1 this year. Notre Dame did not play a team with that kind of record last year. That alone kind of skews it a little bit. Those two things, I should say, alone skew it a little bit. But this is still a quality schedule, in my opinion. I think Texas A&M has a chance to be a better football team this year. Will they be in week one? That's a different question. But I think they have a chance to be. I think Stanford's going to be slightly improved. I think Navy's going to be improved. I think Army's going to be solid. I think Virginia's going to be improved. And I think Georgia Tech's a team that's going to be improved as well. So I do think this is a challenging schedule. It's going to be a little bit more challenging than maybe some Notre Dame fans think that it will be. But it's also, again, it's the challenge of the week after week after week playing quality teams. Even though there's, I don't believe a great team on the schedule. I don't know that there's a single team that I would rank as a preseason top 10 as of right now. Even though I do like Florida State a lot more than others, I wouldn't put it top 10 because they have so many new faces that they have to deal with. But you've got a schedule of 12 games with 7 bowl opponents on it, a better win percentage overall than what you had last year. There's 3 teams on your schedule that won 10 or more games a season ago. When you look at the breakdown of the schedule, there's 5 ACC opponents, 2 Big Ten opponents, 2 AAC opponents, 2 MAC opponents, and 1 SEC opponent. And there's 2 teams, Florida State and Miami, that won conference championships last year. Some quick notes between Notre Dame and these opponents from a history standpoint, which I found entertaining to go through. Notre Dame versus Texas A&M. Notre Dame leads that series 3-2. The last game was played in 2001, a game that Texas A&M won 24-3. Northern Illinois and Notre Dame have never played each other. This is going to be the first time. Interesting note on Northern Illinois, their head coach is a guy named Thomas Hammock. For older folks like me who are college football geeks, you'll remember that name. He was a running back for Northern Illinois that rushed for 1,000 yards in back-to-back seasons for them back in the day before heart problems caused him to have to retire from football. Some more go down to Purdue, one of Notre Dame's longest rivals. Notre Dame leads the series 59-26-2. Purdue's coming off a 4-8 season. The last time they played was in 2021, a game that Notre Dame won 27-13. And this is the beginning of a 5-game stretch where Notre Dame is going to play Purdue. So they play 24, 25, 26, 27, and 28. The teams will play for the next 5 years, which I'm happy about. I've said this before. Purdue and Michigan State are 2 teams that I would like to see on the schedule with more regularity. They're going into year 2 of the Ryan Walters era. Miami of Ohio is next on the schedule. They're coming off a 11-3 record. They are one of 2 teams on the schedule, with Texas A&M being the other, that has a former Notre Dame coordinator as their head coach. Mike Elko is the head coach at Texas A&M. Chuck Martin, obviously the head coach at Miami. They're coming off his best season. Notre Dame holds a 2-0 record against Miami. The last meeting was in 2017. Chuck Martin was still the head coach then as well. And that was a game Notre Dame won 52-17. Louisville's next. Louisville's coming off a 10-4 season. The series is now tied 2-2. The last time they played was 2023. Louisville obviously won that game last season 33-20. That snapped a 2-game winning streak by Notre Dame. Notre Dame beat Louisville in 2019 and 2020. Beat them at Louisville in 19, beat them at home in 2020. Obviously, Louisville won the first matchup, which came back in 2014. So it is 2-2. Notre Dame's play Stanford next. They are coming off a 3-9 year 1 of the Troy Taylor era. Notre Dame leads that series 23-14. Last year's game was the most recent. Notre Dame won 56-23. A little bit of payback for Notre Dame, though, because last time they played at Notre Dame Stadium, which is where the game will be this year, Stanford won. Next up is Georgia Tech. They're coming off a 7-6 season, which was year 1 of the Brent Key era. Did a really good job. The last time Georgia Tech made a bowl game was back in 2018, which is the same year Notre Dame made its first college football playoff appearance. Notre Dame leads the series 30-36-1. So 30 wins, 6 losses, 1 tie. The last meeting was at home in 2021, a game that Notre Dame won 55-0. The year before, they played at Georgia Tech, and Notre Dame won that game. This thing was 31-13 at Georgia Tech. Navy's up next. They're coming off a 5-7 season. And a lot of teams on the schedule are either in year 1 or year 2 of new coaches. This is another one. Brian Newberry goes into year 2. Notre Dame leads this all-time series 82-13-1. Last year, Notre Dame won 42-3. So the last time they played. Florida State is next on November 9th. The Seminoles are coming off of a 13-1 record, or 13-1 season. They lead the series. So this is one of the few teams. So if you look at the schedule so far, Notre Dame leads all of them so far, except for the Louisville series, which is tied at 2-2. And Florida State has the all-time lead over Notre Dame. They have won 6, and Notre Dame has won 5. But Notre Dame has got themselves a little bit of a win streak going against the Seminoles. The Irish have won I believe 3 in a row. Yes, 3 in a row against Florida State. They beat Notre Dame. They beat Florida State at home in 2018, 42-13. Beat them at home again in 2020, 42-26. Beat them in Tallahassee in 2021, 41-38. If you remember that game, Notre Dame jumped up to a, I think, 38-20 lead. Florida State tied it up. Notre Dame won it in overtime, 41-38. And then, of course, Florida State has played in South Bend. Let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4. This will be the 6th time Notre Dame has won the most recent 2. Florida State beat Notre Dame in South Bend in 2003, 37-0. Also beat Notre Dame in South Bend the first time the two teams ever played in 1981, and then Notre Dame won, of course, in 1993 in the game of the century. So Notre Dame will be looking to tie that series up this year. Virginia's next. Notre Dame leads that all-time series 4-0. The Cavaliers are coming off of a competitive 3-9. They really were. I think Virginia was a competitive team last year at 3-9. Quality squad with Tony Elliott. They just couldn't win, but they had 3 or 4 other games you thought they had a chance to win. The last time they played was 2021 in Charlottesville. Notre Dame won 28-3. Interestingly, they played to start the season in 1989 and didn't play again until 2015. So the last 3 games have come recently. They played in 2015 in Charlottesville, Notre Dame. That was the come from behind game where Deshaun Kaiser hit Will Fuller to win it, to walk it off, basically. Then they played again in 2019. Notre Dame won that game. Virginia actually had an early lead. That was actually a pretty entertaining game early. Bryce Perkins was the quarterback. He was doing a really good job early. And then the second half, the Notre Dame pass rush just took that game over. They had 2 fumbles that they returned, 1 for a score, 1 inside the 10 to really break that game open. In the game, they won 35-10. And then we go next to Army. Notre Dame holds a 39-8-4 lead over Army, who's coming off of a 6-6 record. Army, interestingly, you would think is bowl eligible by being 6-6, but 2 of their wins, you can only to be a bowl eligible, you have to be a 500 team or better, and you have to have I think all but one of your wins has to come against FBS teams. Last year, Army had 2 wins over FCS teams, so they weren't bowl eligible. Last time these 2 played, also a Shamrock Series game down in San Antonio. Notre Dame won that 44-6, and then they wrapped the season up against USC. Trojans are coming off an 8-5 record. Notre Dame leads that series 51-38 with 5 ties. Last meeting at home last year was a 48-20 win by Notre Dame. The last time they played in LA, however, 2022, the Trojans won 38-27. So let's look a little bit deeper into the schedule, give you some of my opinion of it. Won't spend too much time on each team beyond what we just did. During the summer, we'll do a deep dive. We'll have shows kind of geared toward each team as we get into the offseason after the spring and everybody. And the reason I want to do it now is because we can give a rough estimate of where teams are, but there's going to be another portal time after spring ball for everybody that some teams are going to lose players, they're going to gain players. So it's a little bit too early to do deep dives onto each team. But I think as of right now, this is kind of my feelings on the season so far of where it stands right now. Number one, I think there's 4 what I would call big games for Notre Dame. Big games are games that to me are going to go a long way towards defining the season. They may not all be necessarily, top 10 teams or top 25 teams even, but they're all gauges for Notre Dame. And it begins obviously with Texas A&M. Then the Louisville home game, the Florida State home game, and the USC road game are all, to me, big games for Notre Dame. And I'll tell you, I like the way the schedule's set up. If you're talking about is the schedule set up to favor Notre Dame, to help Notre Dame, I think it absolutely is. And one of the things I looked at when I was looking at these big games is when does Notre Dame play them, but then also who do they play around it? So like this past year, when you talk about Notre Dame's big games, I think they had probably more big games last year than this year. I mean, preseason, I thought NC State was going to be a big game. Obviously, Ohio State was going to be a big game. Louisville ended up being a big game. USC was a big game. Clemson was a big game. Duke was the trap team. And when I look at this schedule, there's not a single game where they play 2 of their best opponents not only do they not play them in back-to-back games, they're not even 2 out of 3 in a stretch. So when you look at the 4 that I perceive to be the biggest games, the A&M game, there's 3 games between A&M and Louisville, and then Louisville and Florida State, there's 3 games between Louisville and Florida State, and then there's 2 games between Florida State and USC. And then you look at some other games or other aspects of it. Okay, well, what do you have to play around your big games? Well, Texas A&M and Notre Dame does not play in either the week before or the week after all of its big games, which I think is interesting. And especially for all of you that think Notre Dame bye weeks are like this end all be all for favoring a team. Texas A&M, obviously it's the season starter, so there's no game the week before. And then the week after, they're at home against Northern Illinois. Perfect come down game. Then they play Louisville on September 28th. And this might actually be one of the toughest back-to-back matchups they have all year. And that's saying something. That was not necessarily meant in complimentary fashion. They play Miami of Ohio the week before, and then they have a bye week the week after before then hosting Stanford. So again, you have a very complimentary schedule around that big Louisville game. Next is Florida State. You play Navy the week before in New Jersey. Then you come home to play the Seminoles. And then you have Navy's the game before it, but there's a bye week after Navy. And I've said this before. I know people love to have the byes before Navy. Understand that. If I could prefer a bye, I would much rather have a bye the week after Navy, not the week before, because then you have that time to recover from whatever you perceive to be the issues with that. Plus, you have a week to kind of reprogram your brains to getting away from the triple option if that's something your program struggles with, which Notre Dame has not struggled with in recent years. So then you have Florida State by the week before and then home game against Virginia the week after. And then finally, you play at USC, last game of the regular season. You have no game after. There's no game coming after. So you empty everything into that game. You pour everything into that game. The week before they play Army. Army is not a very good football team. I mean, I know that there's people calling it a trap game. I just don't see it. I think Jeff Monken's a really good football coach, but that team is not very good. You look at their schedule last year, they lost to Louisiana Monroe. They beat Delaware State, had a good win over Texas San Antonio, lost to Syracuse, lost to Boston College, lost to Troy, lost to LSU 62-0, lost to UMass, beat Air Force when Air Force was completely crippled, beat Holy Cross by 3, beat Coastal Carolina, who wasn't very good last year, and then beat Navy. So of their 6 wins, 2 of them were over our fellow option team. Actually, 3 of them, I believe, because I believe Holy Cross is, I think Holy Cross is an option team as well. I could be wrong on that, but I thought that they were. And as I said, Coastal Carolina wasn't a very good team. The week after Air Army beat Coastal Carolina lost to James Madison 56-14. So they weren't a very good football team either. So, and the way that they run their option, it's not the way that it used to be. And Navy's also going away from it a little bit. As somebody just pointed out, the thing that's challenging to me about that schedule is just the travel. You have to go to New York one week, come home, you fly out to USC that following week. And I believe that Thanksgiving is the week of the USC game as well. Yes, Thanksgiving is the 28th for Notre Dame. So obviously your Thanksgiving is probably going to be out in LA. So that's kind of how I view that. Talk about trap games. I really don't see a lot of trap games on the schedule in regard to what I view as a trap game is a team that maybe not a lot of people are talking about that could beat you if you don't play, bring your best, or they happen to just kind of play their best game, or a team that's basically the way it's situated. I thought Duke was the epitome of a trap game this year, and it kind of proved to be accurate because of I thought Duke was better than people thought. I felt Duke should have been a preseason top 25 team. They weren't, but also were scheduled right after Ohio State, right before Louisville. I thought the way that it was scheduled was going to be really, really tough, and it turned out to be so. So when you look at the schedule for trap games, I don't see any trap games being there, with the exception of maybe Virginia. But I don't view Virginia as a trap game because I just don't think they're that good, to be honest with you. I mean, they're scrappy, they compete and all that, but they're just not a real talented team. That should not be a competitive game, if we're being honest. Could Virginia and a trap game to me is not could you lose that game? And there's a lot of games you could lose. I mean, Stanford wasn't a trap game 2 years ago. It was just a game where they didn't show up and they got beat. A trap game is more of it's an opponent that if they bring it that day, and even if you play okay football, they can beat you. If Notre Dame plays okay football, they're beating Virginia. If Notre Dame plays okay football, they're beating Army. If Notre Dame just plays okay football and Georgia Tech brings their A game, they can lose that game. I think that's why I have, for me, the biggest trap game is Georgia Tech. I don't view Purdue as a trap game. I think Purdue is a team where Notre Dame would have to play poorly to lose that game. If I'm just being honest, I mean, I think that there's always some aspects of this schedule that they have to prove that they can win on the road. Two of their first three games will be on the road. That's something that you look at. But the other interesting part too about the schedule is Notre Dame only has three true road games all year. And by a true road game, I mean a game where you're playing at that team's home field. A&M, Purdue, and USC is it. Georgia Tech is a considered a road game, but as I said earlier, they're playing it actually in Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta. And that Notre Dame will actually be playing in an NFL stadium in back-to-back weeks, because the next week they go out to New Jersey to play Navy at MetLife. So that's another aspect of it. So what I think is the other aspect of it is the toughest schedule, the toughest stretch of games, and to me, it's the last four. I don't. I think you could look at maybe the first five, because you have A&M on the road, you have Louisville at home, but I think that's early in the season. It's going to be fresh. And because the first five, you have two of your toughest games, and then the last four, you have two of your toughest games. But I think the teams around, between Florida State and USC, to me, what makes that the toughest stretch is it is later in the year. Your depth is going to be pushed a little bit more. I think Florida State is arguably the best team on your schedule. I think USC could be the second or third best team on your schedule. Virginia and Army are going to be scrappy. They're going to make you compete. Again, Notre Dame should beat both teams a lot. I just don't see it as being games that necessarily should be really, really tough. And when you look at overall at the travel, it's actually not one of Notre Dame's worst seasons as far as the travel. I mean, the total miles are going to be a lot, because you're making a trip out to the West Coast at USC. You're making a trip all the way down to Texas. You're making a trip, but you're making two trips to the East Coast, which are pretty easy flights for anyone that's ever flown from New York, from South Bend to those areas, which I have. It's a pretty easy flight. And then you've got the game at Purdue, which is probably a bus ride. I mean, Notre Dame could choose to stay there the night before, depending on when the game starts. But back in the day, that's a bus ride. And as somebody in the chat pointed out, there's going to be a lot of Notre Dame fans in that stadium. So I don't think the travel's actually that bad, to be honest with you. And then, of course, the Atlanta trip, also not a rough trip. It's a pretty easy trip. And it comes after two straight home games. I mean, Notre Dame will, between playing Purdue on September 14th, Notre Dame will not go on the road again for over a month. They'll be at home right in the middle of the season a lot. And there's never a period outside the first three games where Notre Dame is away from home for two times in 5 weeks. So I mean, think about it. So they play Purdue on September 14th. They don't go on the road again until October 19th. Now, two of their next 5 games, or 3 of their next 5 games, are away from home. But you've got Georgia Tech and Navy back-to-back weeks where you're not going anywhere. But then you've got a bye week and then 2 home games. So 3 weeks before you finish your last 2 games on the road. So I think the schedule set up very nicely for Notre Dame. There's 5, I think the bye weeks fall in there really nicely. You have 5 games to start the season, then a bye, 3 weeks to start the season, then a bye, and then 4 games to end it. Yeah, of the first 5, 3 at home, 2 away. The second 3, 1 home, 2 neutral. The last 4, 2 home, 1 away, 1 neutral. So I think the schedule sets up really nicely. And as I said, only 3 true road games. And here's the other interesting part. There's only 2 road games that are actually going to be on another team's campus, because USC obviously plays in the Coliseum, which is not on their campus. Now, that I consider a true road game, because that's where USC plays their home games. Just like I count playing Pitt at Heinz Field a true road game, just because that's considered where they play. But there's also a difference between true road games and playing on another team's campus, which has a completely different feel. Notre Dame only has 2 games like that this season, which makes it very interesting. It makes for a very interesting schedule for Notre Dame. When you look at the 3 schedule, Notre Dame played NC State in a true road game. They played Duke in a true road game. They played Louisville in a true road game. They played Clemson in a true road game, and they played Stanford in a true road game. So you had 5 true road games that were all, I believe, NC State, Duke, Louisville, Clemson, Stanford. Yes, all 5 of those played on campus of another team. So this year there's only 2, which also fits Notre Dame very nicely. So that's my thoughts and my look at the Notre Dame schedule. I know there's a couple questions in there about the schedule. I'll get to those in the mailbag section. As I said before, if you guys do have questions, please go ahead and put those in there now, and I'll get to those. I just starred one from Brandon, so I'll try to get to as many of those as I can when the next section is over. But I think this is a schedule that's very favorable for Notre Dame. I think it's one of those things where we'll have to see how this team develops and how this team plays. There's still some questions about other teams, but just where we are right now, I think it's a situation where this is a schedule that to me sets up very nicely for Notre Dame. And a lot of games where you're going to argue, we could debate if there's a single team on the schedule that has a better roster than Notre Dame's. I don't believe there is one. We've had this debate before. I do think Florida State is the closest of all the teams on there. Louisville's not super far behind. A&M's not super far behind. USC's not super far behind. But I don't think anybody top to bottom has a better roster than Notre Dame's, which adds to really why I'm excited about this schedule. So it's going to be a lot of fun. So I'm going to take a quick 30-second break here, catching my breath a little bit, and get my notes ready for part 2. But in part 2 of today's show, I'm going to dive into the Notre Dame offensive line, which is kind of fitting to be talking about this the same day as the schedule, because I believe that one of the best ways to handle a tough schedule, one of the best ways to play well on the road, one of the best ways to win against your best opponents is to win in the trenches. We've already previewed the Notre Dame defensive line. Now I'm going to talk about the offensive line and see what this unit's capable of when we talk about how good this team can be. Because how good this team can be, how well Notre Dame can manage this schedule is going to be dependent a lot on how the offensive line evolves. So we'll get to that next. But before we do me a favor, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast. If you're listening via podcast platform, especially on Spotify or any of the other platforms you listen to, we would greatly appreciate a 5-star review. We're very happy to be partnered with Spotify, who is trying to continue to help Irish Breakdown grow more and more and more. And if you have not done so, sign up for the message board at boards.irishbreakdown.com. I'm going to have a big recruiting intel drop here the next day or two on the boards, so you're not going to want to miss that. Just kind of where things stand with everything. Ryan and I and Sean are going to get together and put that together here over the next couple of days, so definitely be on the lookout for that. But that will be only on the premium message board, the Champions Lounge message board, which you can find at boards.irishbreakdown.com. All right, we're going to dive back into the O-line here a little bit. I did want to address this real quick for my man Salty. Said, for what it's worth, Irish Breakdown, I love your attic broadcast site from the RTCF show. So first of all, that's not my attic. That's my reading room, which is right next to my basement. So it's not my attic. And there's 2 reasons I don't record there very often. One is just because I feel like everybody kind of does the bookshelf thing behind them, which I have no problem with. It's just kind of, you know me, I like to be a little bit different. But number 2, it's hard to do it because, as you know, Angela works and she runs her own business and she works out of the house as well. And so like today, she's in meetings right now. And as I'm doing the show, and she'd be talking and you could hear almost every word because of the way that the mics are. And our house isn't that big, where, if I'm in one bedroom upstairs and she's in another one, we're far apart. Our house is not very big. And so the only way to be somewhere at home where she and I can't hear each other or the mics can't pick it up is when I'm in the basement. And right now, for those who don't know, the reason I'm here in this house that I've rented in South Bend, which is our new studio, is because I have no living room anymore. I have no dining room anymore. I have no kitchen anymore. And I have no basement anymore because of the flood we had back in November. And they're finally doing all the repairs, and it's going to take about 5 to 6 weeks. Fortunately, tomorrow they'll be 2 weeks down. So there is light at the end of the tunnel. So there's been some walls taken down. I'm excited about what it's going to look like when it's all done, but it's obviously been a very stressful process. So I'm going to be here for a little bit while. I will do some of the weekend shows from there, however. Trust me, buddy, I would much rather do shows from there because I don't feel like getting in the car every day and having to drive 20 minutes to go to work. I will not complain about that though, because I know that's what a lot of people have to do. But I've been spoiled by being able to work out of my house for the most time. So and somebody says, a reading room. You mean you have a room that's just for reading, or do you have something that allows you to read minds in there? It's just for reading. So it's where all of our bookshelves are. We have a desk in there that used to be for sitting at reading and doing Bible studies and stuff. But Sadie took that room over. So now there's actually like doggy steps that go up to it and a doggy bed on top because she likes to sit on it and look outside over the backyard. But no, it is just a room for reading. So lots of books over there. And Anne's got me a new recliner that's in there that's incredibly comfortable. You can ask Vince. He sat on it when he was helping us move some stuff a couple weeks ago. He's like, I don't want to get up and work on this anymore. So it's very cool. So that's why we're here. For those of you who don't know, that's why we're in this location, this undisclosed location. And I do plan on getting some IB stuff hung up here at some point in time, but just haven't a chance to get to that yet. So let's dive into part 2 of the show today, which is going to look at the Notre Dame offensive line. So we've been doing this offseason overview of the team and kind of where things are, and we'll have it wrapped up in the next week or two, and then we'll kind of dive into some spring previews as Notre Dame gets ready for spring ball, which will start in March, as it does every year. And we're going to talk about the offensive line today because this is such an important part of what Notre Dame is going to be this season. And it's a very hard unit to figure out because depending on what your focus is on is going to determine just how excited you are or aren't for what this football team is going to be in 2024. Because if you're focusing on experience, and I've said this before, I think the offensive line is a position where experience is very important, then you may get real nervous about the offensive line. And I'll dive into more specifics here in a little bit. If your feeling is on, size, it's going to be a pretty big offensive line. If your experience is on, talent, then that's something that's going to get you excited. If you watched the last game of the year or even the last few games of the year and you watched how Charles Jagasol played and even how Tosh played, but how Ashton Craig played and how Billy Strouth played, you get even more excited. But it's also a unit that has a lot of question marks. And so we're going to dive into all those. I'm going to talk about what was lost, talk about what returns and what's new, and just kind of give some overall feelings on all of those. And then I'm going to ask really 5 important questions that are going to determine just how good this offensive line can be. So I'm very much looking forward to what this group can be and just learning about it. I mean, not even just learning, like I'm excited to see how great it's going to be. I just want to see what it's going to be, and hopefully it's good news. All right. I'm having all types of problems today getting this production going, folks. So I do apologize. We're going to talk about the offensive line. I'm just going to reset this whole thing. I'm sorry, everybody. This was a hot mess today, but I'm going to rebound, right? And we're going to get this thing going. So when you talk about the Notre Dame offensive line, this is a unit that's going to say a lot about how good Notre Dame can be this season. This is a unit whose ability to come together as one is going to determine ultimately if this is a good offense or if this is a championship offense. How well this offensive line comes together is going to determine whether or not Notre Dame can be a good 10-2 team that plays in a nice bowl game and maybe wins and goes 11-2 and grows by another step, that type of thing. And or if this is a team that can make the playoff, or if this is a team that can make the playoff and go on a run. I truly believe, because of what I know and what I also think about other parts of the team, I think the defense is going to still be really good, if not better. I think the quarterback position is going to be a lot better. I think the skill players on offense are going to be a lot better. Even though you lose Audric, I think the overall returning at the three positions, quarterback, running back, wide receiver, tight end, is going to be really, really good. You all know I'm incredibly high on Riley Leonard. I think there's a lot working in Notre Dame's favor this season when it comes to the offensive line. The problem, however, is the question marks up front, and that's what we're going to dive into. And as you know, I'm not sure if you guys heard this part earlier, if I had muted myself, but I'll say it again. I think depending on how excited you are about the line depends on what you're focusing on. If you're focusing on the talent, you're going to be excited. If you're going to focus on how well this group looked in the last game of the season, because everybody that played a bunch in the last game of the season, which was the bowl game against Oregon State, they looked really good. And if you're going to talk about how well some of the younger guys played down the stretch, you're going to be excited. If you're just looking at overall talent, you're going to be fired up. If you're someone who likes size, this is going to be I think a pretty good sized offensive line. However, if you're focused on experience, which is very important, in my opinion, when it comes to the offensive line, if not the position where it is most important, I think you could argue that is going to come down to where some of your angst is going to come from. And so we'll dive into all those type of things as we get into this. But first, you have to look at what was lost, because this is where a lot of the concern comes from. And it's really interesting because losing Zeke Correll the way that he played last season, it's a loss, but because I think Zeke played better than a lot of people gave him credit for. But part of the reason you're not too upset about it is because of how well Ashton Craig played down the stretch. The tackle is the bigger question, and obviously the obvious ones at left tackle with Joe Alt. You know, this is a kid that made 33 career starts, but all 33 came consecutively. He was, I don't even know that he ever had an injury that we knew about that had any issues. And then you kind of get into other aspects of it, of just how dominant he was as a junior and how consistent and steady he is as a player the last couple of years. And you say, hey, that's a big loss. That's a big loss for anybody. I don't care who you are. That's a big loss. And Notre Dame's going to have to find a way to overcome that. Of course, they're going to have to find a way to overcome that. With Blake Fisher, the interesting thing is going to be, it's not so much what you're losing that is the problem, because I actually thought Blake took a step back in 2023. I thought Blake was one of the more disappointing players on the Notre Dame team this past season. But the reason I think it's still a concern, at least for me, I'm speaking for myself, is the fact that, yes, he was disappointing last season, but two things. Number one is you don't know that the people that replaced him are going to be any better. And number two, if Blake would have come back, there's the thought that he would have finally kind of figured it out and kind of taken that next step as a player and would have stepped up and been a much, much better player, possibly likely better than anybody that Notre Dame was going to have in 2024. And I think that's where some of that angst comes from and some of that concern comes from is that. And so it's not so much that you're losing Blake's 27 career starts. I think he made 26 of those were in a row. It's the what if, the what could have been. I think that to me is the biggest thing that I focus on when I'm talking about what Notre Dame lost in the 2023 season. And of course, you also lost Andrew Kristofic, who had started 8 career games and was a really good utility backup lineman. He could play center, he could play guard, he could play tackle in a pinch. I think Andrew Kristofic at some point in time of his career, either as a starter or as a coming off the bench, played 4 of the 5 offensive line positions. I know at least 3. I know he at least played left guard. I know he at least played center. I know he definitely played a right tackle. I'm pretty sure he played right guard at one point in time, coming off the bench in the game as well. So you're losing that also. I mean, not many teams have a backup that had 8 career starts like Notre Dame did last year with Andrew Kristofic, and you're losing that as well. But what gets people excited, of course, is the next part of this breakdown, which is what returns. And we'll kind of go position by position and just kind of break down everything that comes back. And what has me excited, obviously, you return your 2 starters from the bowl game, Charles Jagusah and Tosh Baker. As you can see from this breakdown, if you're not watching and you're listening to podcasts later, your top 2 tackles are Charles Jagusah, who's a sophomore, listed at 6'7", 326. And your right tackle is Tosh Baker, a fifth-year senior who's listed at 6'8", 315. Behind them, you have Emil Wagner, who I do fully believe is going to go into the spring and battle for one of those 2 starting jobs at 6'6", 284, a little undersized, but very powerful and athletic. Then you have Sullivan Absher, who is a sophomore, 6'7", 318, big kid, good athlete for his size, powerful. And then, of course, Ty Chan, who's 6'5", 310. I leave Ty Chan at tackle because that's where he played last year when we saw him. I still wish Ty could be able to move inside, and I'm curious if the arrival of the newcomers, which we'll dive into, finally allows Notre Dame to maybe move him inside where Ty, I think, would be more comfortable, and maybe then we can see him do a little something this year. But I think when you look at the tackle position, your shortest guy is 6'5". You have great length at the position. You've got girth at the position, and Tosh has filled out a little bit. Charles played really well after the first, it's a series and a half, 2 series of the bowl game. He kind of had a little bit of a welcome to college football moment on the first series or 2. After that, I thought he settled in and played really good football, considering true freshman, first career start, things along those lines. And then at right tackle, you have Tosh Baker at 6'8", 315. And, one of the questions that was just asked is, is Charles Jagusah a pure left tackle? I think he is for the college game. I think Charles Jagusah is a pure left tackle in the college game, same way that Mike McGlinchey was. Is he a guy that's going to look like Joe Alt? No. Is he a guy that's going to be able to do everything that Liam Eichenberg and Mike McGlinchey did during their careers? Yes, I do. I think he's a quality athlete. He's incredibly long. He's powerful. He can play in space. So I think he can, and I believe when you look at the 2024 team specifically, and this is a question to Kenny Moore, one of our OGs who has the question. I understand completely the question and the concern, but for me, I look at it as college versus NFL. Is Charles Jagusah an NFL left tackle? I don't know that as of right now. I'd say no, but neither was Mike McGlinchey, neither is Liam Eichenberg, and they were both All-Americans at left tackle. The thing about Charles is there's none of the traits he lacks, and then number one. And then number 2, when you look at if there was going to be an issue for him at left tackle, it would be this season. But this season, when I think of what this offense is going to look like, I think he's going to fit it very well because it's going to be an offense that's going to be very balanced. They're going to be running the football. They're going to be doing a lot of different things that allow them to protect the backside of the line in different ways because of the mobility of Riley Leonard. So it's not so much that can he play left tackle. It's my concern. It's just going to be more of how good can he be in year 1, basically as a full-time starter, as a true sophomore. Where will he be assignment correct standpoint? Where will he be from a fundamental standpoint? Where will his conditioning be to play through a 12-game regular season and then hopefully 4 games in the postseason? I think those are all legitimate concerns about Charles because we haven't seen it. But I think the talent is enormous, as I said. I had Charles as a 5-star recruit coming out of high school. I think he showed that off last year at different times, and I'm glad they finally are playing him at tackle. When I look at right tackle, I think what's the expectation? Is Tosh Baker going to be the top 100 recruit that I had graded him coming out of high school? No, he's not. I don't see him making that kind of jump. I think Tosh played well in the bowl game. I think Tosh, to me, is a guy that still has some ability. When he can keep his pads low, he's pretty solid, and that's all you need because honestly, just a solid player would be an upgrade over what they had the last 2 seasons at right tackle. Now, do I expect Tosh to ever flash the way that Blake did when he was on his game? No, I do not. Do I believe that Tosh can bring a more consistent presence to the position? Yes, I do. And now Tosh has got to prove that, right? But I think that's the potential that he brings to the table compared to what it was the past couple years. So I'm not quite as concerned about right tackle. The other reason I'm not overly concerned about right tackle is because of what else they have. If Tosh Baker's not getting the job done, you've got Emil Wagner, who's got talent. You've got Sullivan Absher, who has a lot of talent, and you're bringing in Gerby Lambert, who I think is one of the 2 or 3 best offensive tackles in all of high school football last year. And I had graded out as a 5-star recruit. And interestingly, played right tackle in high school. I say interestingly because I think he's got left tackle tools all over, but his high school team played him at right tackle for some reason. So that's why right tackle for me is not overly concerned, just because you don't have to start the same guy every time because you have options. So if a guy doesn't get it done, you have people you can turn to, and that's an important part of why I like the tackle depth chart coming back from Notre Dame next year. When you look at what comes back on guard, you have 3 guys coming back at guard that have started at least 3 games. That's a good place to be. Obviously, you have Pat Coogan at the top, started all 13 games last year. Had some solid moments and had some rough moments, but sometimes I feel like when we're really critical of Pat Coogan, and I'm speaking to myself as well, you have to be careful that you don't allow your projection of what you thought he would be, or you don't project your feelings of what you thought he would be, uh, and look at it from kind of what he is. And to me, Pat Coogan's better than I thought he was going to be. He never showed me last year that he's a lockdown, no doubt about it, definitely should be starting kind of guy. And that's kind of the thing. But he did some good things next year. And again, it was year 1 as a starter. We have to be willing to give him the chance to get better now that he goes into a senior season in year 2 as a starter. Will he? I don't know. But that's something he's gonna have to prove. But behind that, there's a lot of win. I don't know if Rocco is going to be healthy for spring ball. What I'm saying is, I'm not saying it like I'm questioning if he'll be healthy. I'm legitimately saying I have no update on his injury, and so I can't speak to whether or not that he will be able to play. But he should be back by the fall at some point in time. Rocco started 10 games this year. Behind him, you've got Billy Schrouth, very talented player. Billy Schrouth is one of those guys that I'm very much looking forward to seeing if he can make a jump this season. I think of all the players on the board, he's the guy that to me would be at the top of my needs to make a jump, but is in a position to make a jump this season. He was a sophomore last year, missed a lot of his freshman year, missed all of the spring of his freshman year. Should have played earlier in the season, didn't. I thought handled himself very well when he did step into the lineup at the end. And now you kind of springboard into next season and hope that Billy can use the offseason to get better and better and better. I like the depth behind it. Sam Pendleton is a guy that I've got my eye on as a player that can push push the older players, whether it's this year or next year. Really like Sam Pendleton. And if you're not sure of Sam Pendleton or you don't really know what he brings to the table, go watch the 4th quarter of the bowl game, and you'll get a sense of why people like Sam Pendleton. He's a really, really good player. And then the biggest guy of all is Christopher Tarrick, who's going to be a sophomore this season as well. Moving over to the centers, you've got Ashton Craig and Joe Otting coming back for Notre Dame. Ashton Craig obviously started the last 3 games of the season. And to me, his emergence late in the year, I thought Ashton played pretty well considering true sophomore, first 3 starts. I thought he handled himself very well. At times looked like a first-year starter that hadn't played a lot of football, making mental mistakes, making technical mistakes, maybe going the wrong way, being a little bit late getting to a certain spot. But there was a lot of snaps where you saw the ability and you're like, that guy's going to be pretty good when he gets it all figured out. And that's obviously what you saw last year from Ashton Craig. And, he's longer than Zeke Correll, a little bit more athletic than Zeke Correll. I think he's a little bit more naturally heavy than Zeke Correll. And I think all those things are going to help him. And then Joe Otting is going to his sophomore year behind him. Joe Otting is a guy that I know a lot of Notre Dame coaches are excited about. And the feeling is that the depth at center is going to be really good for years. You've got Ashton Craig, and then Joe Otting behind him, perhaps Anthony Knapp coming in behind him. There's a chance to really be good. And obviously, the big thing for Ashton for me in year 2 is going to be, can he handle the mental part the way Zeke did? And I think that's going to be a big part. Zeke was a pretty smart kid that can handle a lot up front from a calls and a check standpoint. And Ashton's got to prove that he can handle that. And now here's the thing that to me is going to be interesting in all of this. If they were still running the same run concepts we saw last year, I'd be a little bit more concerned about the O-line. But I'm breaking down Notre Dame's. I'm breaking down Mike Denbrock right now, and I'm through the first two games, and I mean it is inside zone heavy. Now, we'll see what kind of changes and developments going to happen as the season goes on as I continue breaking it down, and so we'll find all that kind of stuff out. But I mean, it's heavy inside zone. And to me, that really fits in well with what this offensive line is going to be. Now, it's not one play, it's inside zone, it's split flow. I mean, they've run a little bit of mid zone, they run lock zone, they do a lot of different things off of it. So you can't just bear down on it, or you'll find yourself giving up a big run or big cutback or different things. But it's very inside zone dominant. And I think that really fits what this personnel grouping is going to be about. I think this is a pretty athletic group. It's got some size. It's a group that to me, if coached properly, has a chance to really kind of take that step and become a very physical moving zone type of team. And then you look at what's new, and this is something to me that gets me fired up as well, because I think the top two guys on this board, Gerby Lambert and Peter Jones, both are guys that could play as freshmen if needed. Very, very talented players. Styles Prescott is a guy that I like a lot. Very, very high ceiling. But with him, he's just going to need time. Same with Anthony Knapp. Those guys are going to need time. But Gerby Lambert and Peter Jones are guys to me that can help you out right now. So let's get down to the final part. I just talked about what they lost, what they returned, what's new. So then it going to comes down to, okay, well, what's this group going to be? And that gets us to the last part of the show, which is, what are the biggest questions that we have about this line? And questions from the standpoint of, can these things happen? And if these things are all answered in a positive manner, then this line will be very, very good, in my opinion. I don't know that they're all going to get answered positively. And if they are all answered positively, it will be a scale. Like this was answered positively, but maybe not quite as positively as another. There's always levels to how good things are when it comes to answering questions when it comes to a football team. So here are my 5 big questions that are ultimately going to tell us everything we need to know about the Notre Dame offensive line this season, which, as I said, I love the depth, I love the talent, I love the size, I love the athleticism, I love the potential. But the one word that I probably, and you guys know what I'm about to say, the word that I hate most in football is when you're using the word potential to describe a college player. Because if you're talking about potential all the time, more often than not, it's because he hasn't reached it. And that means it's an inconsistent player, or it's a position that's not a strength at that point in time. And so to me, right now, this offensive line is almost all about potential. And when you look at, just going back a couple slides, when you look at that part down there, total starts, they lost 99, they returned 34, right? When you only have 34 starts coming back, and 13 of those starts, which is over a third, is from one guy who most of us would argue is the least talented guy that's going to be competing for a starting job this year, that's a problem. That's a problem. And so that's where a lot of these questions come from, because right now, this group is almost all about potential. And it needs to stop being about potential and be about production and about performance. And these questions to me are going to determine that. Number one question that I look at is, will there be a year 2 jump under Joe Rudolph? We saw it last year. The Notre Dame defense made a huge jump in year 2 under Al Golden. Circumstances are a little bit different overall defensively, a little bit more similar to the defensive line versus offensive line. You saw in year 1, there were some times in Al Washington's line was good. Other times they weren't as good. You had a group of guys that had kind of bought into what the previous coach was selling. There was a little bit of an adjustment to the new coach. Some of it didn't go well. Some of it was okay, but it was a transition going from Mike Elston to Al Washington. Year 2, players are more bought in. Players are more comfortable with Al Washington. Al Washington is more comfortable with the players. They're in a system that they know. And all of a sudden in year two, D line is way better than it was in year one, despite losing Isaiah Foskey, despite losing Jason Adamiola, despite losing Justin Adamiola, despite losing Chris Smith, despite losing Jacob Lacey, who they did lose in the middle of the season. You had a lot of personnel losses from guys that played a lot of snaps the previous year, and you still came out and you were a much better defensive line than you had the year before. And I'll just point out the snaps here as I pull this up. Just looking at where the snaps were for Notre Dame in 2023 of the guys they lost, or excuse me, going into 2023. Here's the snap counts of the guys they lost from the defensive line in 2023. They lost Isaiah Foskey, who played 563 snaps. They lost Justin Adamiola, who had played 485 snaps. They lost Jason Adamiola, who played 419 snaps. They lost Chris Smith, who played 265 snaps last season. And then they lost Jacob Lacey, who played 72. I mean, so that's well over 1,000. So that's over 1,500 snaps that they lost in the D line. They come out in year two with a much, much better group and really just thrive, in my opinion. And that was kind of the thing that we talked about after year one, was there was not a lot of buy-in to Al Washington in year one. In year two, there was more so, and the performance was better. And so to me, does the offensive line follow a similar year two jump? Yes, you lost some very talented players, Joe Wall, Blake Fisher, Zeke Correll, just like you lost Isaiah Foskey, Jason Adamiola, Justin Adamiola, and Chris Smith from the defensive line. But you go out in year two and your performance is even better. Can the offensive line do that? It's not an apples to apples conversation, in my opinion, because defensive line, you had a much deeper rotation. A lot of guys have played this year. Howard Cross, Riley Mills, Nano Safa-Mensah, Jordan Patelho, Gabriel Rubio, bringing in Javante Jean-Baptiste. They'd played a lot of football, even though they weren't starters. When you look at the offensive line, it's a little bit of a different situation because you're talking about a group that has not played as much football, and because you just don't rotate as much. And it's also an offensive line requires way more just cohesion than a defensive line does. Not that it's not important on the D line, but offensive line, there's a lot more. I'm working with you, not I've got to make sure I'm in this gap because that's my gap and you've got your gap, but we have to work together in harmony as a duo and as sometimes as a trio, but all together as one to make sure we're being effective. And so there's a lot more to that, in my opinion, when it comes to the play of the offensive line. So can we see that kind of jump? That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that. We've seen this a lot at Notre Dame, in my opinion, in recent seasons, where the level of play goes up in year two of a position coach. Not always, because I think it went down in year two with the receivers coach. Chancey Stuckey did not do as good of a job in year two as he did in year one. We've seen it in other years, but Chris O'Leary got better. Mike Mickens got better in year two. I even think with the loss of Logan Diggs, the running backs were even more fundamentally and technically sound in year two under Dylan McCullough. So we've seen it a lot in recent years at Notre Dame, where in year two, groups got better than where they were before. And so to me, when I look at it, I view this as a situation where there's a chance that it could get better, but it's got to be proven. And that's what we don't know, because I did not like the play of the offensive line this year. Way too inconsistent, not nearly physical enough as a group, not nearly, I mean, it just, they'd step up in big games against Ohio State and then completely lay an egg, you know what, the bed, whatever expression you want to use, the next 2 weeks. And you just can't have that on the offensive line. You have to have some level of, I know what the floor is when you're talking about what a group can do on the offensive line week to week to week. That's the question that they need to answer. Number two, and this is part of year two jump, so kind of goes together. Can this line be more physically dominant? One thing we saw late in 2022, and this is the Harry Hiestand influence, is you saw a line that became more physically dominant week after week after week. And you saw a group that you said, boy, when they are, I mean, just think about what they did to Clemson. Just physically whooped Clemson's butt, just physically whooped Syracuse's butt. We never saw this offensive line really do that this year. Even in the games where they were blocking for good yards, they never were dominant. It was a lot of it was just make some level of a hole and then go let Audric be Audric. You know, there was never that sheer dominance that we saw from the 22 offensive line and from what we saw from a lot of Coach Heastan's offensive lines over the years. Can this group be that? Part of it is coaching. You know, one of the things we talked about a lot with this group last year was they would stop their feet when they went on contact. They would not drive through. They didn't catch as much as they caught under Jeff Quinn, but they still caught too much. Some of it was footwork. Some of it was guys just weren't dominant players. Well, you're not going to have that excuse this year. You've got guys, in my opinion, across the board that can be physically dominant players, either with size and power or athleticism or a combination of both. Can this unit be that on a more consistent basis? And then just overall consistency. And that's number 3. Can this unit be more consistent from a week-to-week basis? We saw moments last year the offensive line was pretty good. Loved how they played against Ohio State. That's a very good defensive line. And then you come out against Duke and you just get your butt kicked for 60 minutes. It's not acceptable at Notre Dame. Never acceptable at Notre Dame. Can this unit be more just, hey, here's the floor week to week to week. You know what the floor is going to be. There's going to be some weeks you play better than the floor, but the floor has to be here. It has to be in a good place. And we have to learn if this unit can do that. And that's more from a focus standpoint. It's more from an effort standpoint. It's also about execution. It's about playing with sound technique each week. It's about adjusting to what the defense is doing. And honestly, I'm kind of going to give them a little bit of a pass for the first 3-4 weeks because it is going to be a young group getting together and there's going to be some mistakes here and there. But as we kind of get closer to Louisville and beyond, these things should start to get worked out. And it's exactly what we talked about with Coach Heastan in 2022. We said, hey, look, first 3-4 games, there's probably going to be some bumps in the road, but once they get rolling, they should be rolling. And that's pretty much what they did in 2022. Can they do that in year 2 under Coach Rudolph? That's what we're going to find out. And if he is the coach that we think he is and hope he is, then I think this is going to be one of the things that has the biggest impact is just the week-to-week consistency as players have a better understanding of what he wants and as he has a better understanding of who his players are. Those are all going to be aspects that you're going to find out about it. Number 4, what position battles are going to happen this spring? To me, this is a big question mark. And number 1 is, will there even be position battles? Or is Joe Rudolph just going to kind of go into the spring and say, these are my 5, and barring somebody just playing poorly, these are my 5? I hope not, and I hope we have legitimate battles. And if we do have legitimate battles, then we get to question number 5. Will the most talented players rise to the occasion? The reason I put that number 5 is because if you don't have a position battle, then you make it impossible for younger players to perform. And this is one of the biggest frustrations that we have every year when we talk about who's playing and who's not. There's this notion of, well, if they were playing better, they'd play. As if the coaches never make mistakes. They're always right. They always play the perfect guys and the right guys. And that's not reality. It's not how football works. Sometimes it's about, hey, you got to give a guy an opportunity to shine. And if you don't give him that opportunity to shine, then he's not going to shine. Right? So first and foremost, Joe Rudolph needs to create an atmosphere in which competition is welcomed and appreciated and encouraged, and then let the best man win. And if that type of competition is allowed, and I'm talking about all 5 positions, then it comes down to, do the guys that we perceive to be the best players step up to the occasion? That's going to be the final question. Does Charles Jagasaw raise his level of play? Does Ashton Craig raise his level of play? Billy Schrauth, guys that we know about. Who does that at right tackle? Is it going to be Tosh? Is it going to be Emil? Is it Sullivan Absher? Is it Gerby Lambert? What about left guard? Does Pat Coogan kind of raise his level of play and solidify left guard? Not because no one was allowed to challenge him, but because he was allowed to be challenged. And then that challenge caused Pat to raise his level of play, and he beats out those younger players, and then he rises to the occasion. Or do the younger players, to me, step up? And so to me, when I say, will the more talented players rise to the occasion, that doesn't always necessarily mean that they become a starter. If Sam Pendleton comes out this spring, and I believe Sam Pendleton is a more talented player than Pat Coogan, there's not a doubt in my mind. Peter Jones is a more talented player than Pat Coogan, in my opinion. There's several players that I can point to and say that guy's more talented than Pat Coogan, but Pat Coogan has other things going for him, including experience. So if the talented players, like a Sam Pendleton, like a Sullivan Absher, like a um, Peter Jones, whoever you want to list, Emil Wagner, whoever the case may be, if those guys step up and play well this offseason and really start to show off their skill, and there's a real competition allowed at these positions, because real competitions are only real if the result can be impacted by what happens on the field. If there's a real competition and those guys step up and play, then left guard is going to be really good this year, whether Pat Coogan starts there or doesn't. Because if it's a real competition and Pat beats those guys out, then the expectation should be Pat took his game to another level, and he's ready to be that veteran presence at guard. Same thing at right guard. When Rocco comes back, does Rocco push at left guard against Pat? Does he push Billy at right guard? If Rocco brings his A game and Billy brings his A game, then guess what? A real battle will happen, and you're going to be better at right guard, whether it's Billy Strauss starting, whether it's Rocco Spindler starting, whether it's Sam Pendleton starting, whoever Sullivan Absher starting. It doesn't really matter. And I know it's easy for us all to kind of jump onto the bandwagons of players that we liked coming out of high school or guys that we think have the most potential. But to me, these two things are not so much about Notre Dame will be at their best this year if player A steps up. It's not so much about that as much as it's about as a unit, do younger players and veterans all raise their level of play? Are they given real opportunities to start? And is there a real competition? Because if there's a real competition, then your five best will start. Otherwise, it's not a real competition. And so to me, I don't care if it's Pat Coogan and Rocco Spindler again at guard. Don't care as long as it was a real competition and they were the best players for that position. And best player to me is a combination of potential, not potential, talent, and then consistency and execution. And I've said this before, if the execution is similar between a veteran and a younger player, and the older player is slightly better from a consistency standpoint, but the younger guy has a greater gap in talent, then play the younger guy with more talent, and then he will eventually grow into being a more consistent player. Where the guy that's not as talented doesn't all of a sudden become more talented just by playing more reps. And now he becomes more consistent, but he doesn't become 0.2 of a second faster because he's played more. He doesn't bench 100 pounds more on the bench. He doesn't squat more. He's not able to move D tackles more just with physical dominance just because he has more experience. You maximize your own ability more with more experience. But a guy that doesn't have Quentin Nelson's talent is not going to dominate like Quentin Nelson just because he has 70, 80 starts under his belt, right? You have to have a level of talent. So that's going to be the key is guys have to reach their their potential this season. And if that happens, then I'm confident this offensive line is going to be pretty good no matter who starts. And yes, we will all kind of have our preferences on who we want to start. I do. I'm not saying those are bad. I'm simply saying just because we think so-and-so player should start there, if he doesn't, it doesn't mean that the guys that are there can't play or that there wasn't a real competition. And it doesn't mean that there isn't those things either. And that's what we're gonna have to find out when we get out there in the spring and as we continue to talk to more and more sources around the program. And at the end of the day, the judgment will be how they play. And that's going to be the key. This offensive line is going to be so important to how good this team can be. And, how this team plays. Caleb, if Riley Leonard's everything that we hope he is, if the young running backs are everything we hope they are, and the receivers are everything that we hope they are and can be, and the tight ends are good again, this is going to be a really good football team. 10, 11, 8. They could even go 12-0 with just an okay line with the talent that they're going to have based on how good those players are and how good the talent is on defense. But once they get to the postseason, they're going to get exposed if they don't have a line that takes a big jump in year two. And honestly, that's what has me excited about it because I do think there's the potential for it to be good, but there also is legitimate concern because we haven't seen it. And anytime we haven't seen it, it's a question mark. And then they have to go out and prove it. So we'll see if they can do that. We're going to go to the mailbag next. Before we do, folks, do me a favor, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, hit the notification bell, share this podcast. If you're not done so, sign up for the message boards at boards.irishbreakdown.com. We'd love to see you over there. Got a lot of stuff going on. You can sign up for monthly memberships, annual memberships. You get discounts at the Irish Breakdown store, whether you sign up for one or the other. And then, of course, if you want to help us above and beyond just the normal prices, we do have the Booster Club, which comes with some free gear. So if some of you are saying, hey, I really wish I had an IB shirt or an IB mug or whatever the case may be, you can talk to me about signing up for one of those booster clubs, and we'll get you hooked up, get you taken care of. So check those out as well. And that you can find at boards.irishbreakdown.com. So part 3 of today's show is going to be the mailbag. And I see that we have 18 questions in there. I did want to address something that was said in the show earlier, because it's one of my biggest pet peeves. And I cannot stand it when people say this stuff. Somebody said, did we apologize to Al Washington for how hard we went at him after year 1? And the answer is no, because number one, we didn't hate on Al Washington. I absolutely despise how people use the word hate nowadays. It's ridiculous. Analysis of someone's ability is not hate if you are offering honest analysis, right or wrong, honest analysis. And what Al Washington did in year 2 has no bearing on the job he did in year 1. So because Brian Kelly went 12-0 in year 3, do we ignore that he went 8-5 the year before with an even more talented roster? No, he did a bad job in 2011. He did a good job in 2012. Same with Al Washington. Did he do a good job in 2023? Heck yes. And you know who's been praising him for the entire time? Me and my team. Do you know who has not changed their mind about 2022? Us. Because what they did in 2023 does not change the results of 2022. It's as simple as that. We're grown-ups. And grown-ups can say, hey, this was good, this was bad, and just because this is good now doesn't mean it wasn't bad then. If you're a parent and you're always on your kid about making his bed, and they don't make their bed for a week, and then they finally make it, you don't say, well, I was wrong for getting on you the previous 6 days we didn't make your bed. No, you said, hey, finally you're doing what you're supposed to do. And Al Washington did a very good job in 2023. It's real simple. And if you don't like it, I understand. You can be however you want, but here's how we are here. When you do a good job, you will get praised for it. When you do a bad job, you will get criticized for it. And the level of criticism or praise will be determined by where you fit on that sliding scale the entire time. It's really that simple. And so if a coach does a bad job in 1 year and does a good job the next year, guess what? We'll be praiseworthy of him. We're not holding grudges because of what he did the year before. It would be like asking us to do that would be just as dumb, in my opinion, as us being critical of Al Washington this year because we're still upset about the job he did in 2022, right? So the good in 23 doesn't override the not as good in 2022, correct? But the not good in 2022 also doesn't override the really good in 2023. You evaluate for where you are now. That's where it's at. And the job he did now, really good. And we praised him for it. The job he did in 2022, not good. And we didn't praise it for him because he doesn't need me to hold his hand. He's a big boy. He's a grown up, right? And so he and I've had conversations about this stuff. He knows how I feel about it. And he knows exactly where I stand. When you do a good job, I'll be the first person singing your praises. If you don't, you're not going to like me very much. And it's that simple. And it's that way for everybody on the staff. And if you do a better job, I'm not going to apologize. I don't owe him an apology for him not doing as well in 1 year and doing as well this year. That's ridiculous. And so we're not going to do that. So I did want to address that to kick things off as well. Let's get to some of the questions. T Guns, NCAA football is coming back. Let's go, Brian. Let's go. Brian, will you be taking a personal day for the game to drop? Buddy, I will not be taking a personal day to play that video game. I will be taking multiple personal days to play that video game. There is no question about that. And so to me, I mean, you guys just better prepare yourselves when that game comes out. There's a shot we may not have shows for a couple days. Just be ready for it because I will be playing the heck out of that game. Salty Virginia Peanuts. To what extent does Mr. French, that would be Jamie French, have things that are non-starters in his recruitment for Notre Dame? Salty, I don't think it's a situation where, and I love the fact that you added all those second letters in those, because obviously Jamie French spells his name with two F's at the beginning. That's very well played. By the way, I don't know that it's necessarily things that are non-starters. I mean, I think Jamie French likes Notre Dame enough to where Jamie French visited Notre Dame. It's just that I think there's a lot of other schools that are a lot closer to home or have more proven track records to say, okay, I like Notre Dame, but I don't like them as much as these five schools, right? You get what I'm saying? So I don't know that it's necessarily something in particular that he doesn't, that's a non-starter for Notre Dame. There's just the things that are important to him. Notre Dame can't, hey, look, if you're talking about Notre Dame versus Ohio State, Notre Dame versus Georgia, Notre Dame versus Alabama, Notre Dame hasn't produced as many first round picks as most of those guys. The track record of Notre Dame guys going to the NFL is not great. You look at the pass offenses, Notre Dame's not had a great pass offense in recent years. And you look at the overall team success of the teams that he's looking at that are all just better than Notre Dame is right now. Now, do I think if Notre Dame, like if Sam Hartman would have come out this year and been what we all hoped he would have been, would Jamie French like Notre Dame more? Yeah, I think so. Would that automatically mean they'd be a major player for him? Maybe. But I still think the idea of where Notre Dame is and just those other factors to me, it's it just makes it to where Notre Dame's just not really going to be a player for him at this point in time. We got another one from Salty. Got a few questions in here. Salty says Notre Dame is one of Matty Augustine's recently released top 5 finalists for his impending commitment, which will be on February 20th. What are the odds that the Irish are number 1 and when will he commit? Look, Salty, I'm not sure what Ryan and Sean talked about yesterday when it comes to this, but Notre Dame has been his perceived leader since they offered this summer. And Matty Augustine's a very interesting player. He's a converted basketball player, a lot like Chris Burgess and Javion Campbell, who's another kid I like in the 25 class that plays D-line. Matty reclassified from 24 to 25 to get more in line with what his age is, and then also, I believe, more time to play, to develop as a football player. And came to camp this summer, didn't have an offer, relatively unknown type of guy, went out and just played great, just absolutely great at the camp. Really impressed with his size, his power, his athleticism. Staff really, really liked it. And just got an offer. And from that moment, he was a top guy for Notre Dame. And from that moment, he pretty much became Notre Dame was kind of his top guy too. And so to me, when you look at where he is, I just have never felt anyone was close to Notre Dame. I mean, he's got an impressive list. Michigan's gone after him and Ohio State and some other teams, but Notre Dame has just been kind of sitting there in that pole position for a while now. Could that change by the 20th? Perhaps. But I like where Notre Dame is. I would much rather be Notre Dame than I would be anybody else when it comes to the recruitment of Matty Augustine. There's zero doubt about that. Tommy Guns also asked, will you be joining the IB meetup in Indianapolis? I will not. Tommy, I will not be doing that. Robert Matajic, I hope I'm saying that right. I don't know if I am, and I apologize if I'm not. Says, just submitted my 9th Indy MFA application. This is the year, right? Hope so. Acceptance and a natty sigh. Thank you so much for all you do. Your amazing content keeps depressed art types fighting. Well, hey, man, always keep fighting. Obviously, there's no doubt about that. And we'll be praying for you and wishing you best luck, and that this is the year that the acceptance finally comes. That would be tremendous. But, hey, whether it comes or doesn't, God still loves you. We still love you, and there's always a place for here at Irish Breakdown. So we look forward to that. Jason Smith asked a question. Who are your top 5 OC-DC TAMs in college football? Jason, that is a great question, and I'm not going to answer it today, but I'm making a note of it right now. That is going to be a great RTCF show topic coming up here very soon. So we're always kind of taking notes for that portion of it, because obviously, for those who don't know, RTCF recruiting are Notre Dame recruiting, Notre Dame team, T, and then CF, college football. That's what that show stands for. And so that is a really good topic, because I don't know that really thought through that question, to be honest with you. But here's one thing that is exciting. I do believe that Notre Dame is going to be in the conversation for being a team to be in that. I don't want to say for sure that they will, just because I need to see it, right? I need to go through the list and really figure out. But like off the top of my head, some teams that are going to certainly be in conversation for me. Notre Dame is going to be in the conversation. Ohio State is going to be in the conversation with the hiring of Chip Kelly. That was a great pairing. I was not high on the Mike Bobo hire at Georgia last year. Did a solid job in year one, to the point where I think they're at least in the conversation about it. I think Alex Atkins and I'm forgetting their D coordinator's name at Florida State. Adam Fuller, I believe is his name. I think that group is going to be in it. That duo is going to be in it. So there's a lot of teams with really good coordinator combinations this year. And I'm curious, who did Mike Elko hire? Do you guys remember who he hired as his defensive coordinator? Because I know that he hired Connor Klein, which I liked that hire. I'm curious who his defensive coaching staff is. So let me find it here real quick. This article has it. Who's his defensive coordinator? Let me see here. Defensive coordinator. It's the offensive staff. Let's see who's his defensive coordinator. Give me a second here. I'm going to find it here, everybody. I'm just going to hit Control F. Okay, Jay Bateman. Nope, they're not in it. No, Jay Bateman is not a great hire by Coach Elko. That was not good. So A&M's not in it. So I'm going to have to go through and think through all the teams that kind of who they would be. But I know Notre Dame, Ohio State, Georgia's in that conversation. So I'm going to have to go through it all and kind of figure out who I like and what teams are there. I think LSU would have had a shot if they could have kept kept Denbrock and then hired the guy from Missouri. Would have been a good combination, but then they lost him, and now they're not as good as offensive coordinator. So I'm going to look at different aspects of that. And Jay and Jason, we'll get more into this in an RTCF show because that's a fun topic. But I'd have to really look through and study, and I couldn't even necessarily name the coordinators for every team in the country right now. And then, here's the question I would have for you, Jason. When we have this conversation, and this is just true for all of you. So I'd actually like you all in the chat to answer this question for me. So I know when Sean and I talk about this in a future show, kind of what it is. So like when we talk about coordinators, are you more concerned with who has the title or who calls the plays? Because if you're going to talk about, for example, Texas, I believe Steve Sarkisian still calls plays, even though he's not the offensive coordinator. So would you want us to look at Sarkisian and Coach K at Texas, or would or would you want us to look at Lincoln Riley and DeAnton Lynn, or do you want us to look at who the OC is for USC? Because to me that matters. To me, when you got DeAnton Lynn, and I only know what he did last year at UCLA, but he did a really good job there. That's going to look a little different for me than DeAnton Lynn and whoever the offensive coordinator is. So I'm curious what you guys all think about that. Who do you care more about, the guys calling the plays, or do you care more about who the title goes to? And it looks like so far that you guys care more about who calls plays. So that'll be a fun conversation, and we'll try to have some we'll think through that. So that'll be fun, Jason. So I've just made a note of that, and I'm gonna pass that along to Sean. That's going to be one of our RTCF conversations up here very, very soon. Because obviously there's with everything going on in college football, there could be some really heavy conversations when it comes to college football. And we've had some of them lately, but sometimes it's just nice to have some fun and talk ball. And that's a really fun one that would be much less heavy and doom and gloom than some of the other conversations that we're going to have about that. Got a question down here. Let's see. Brandon Plensner has a question. How do you feel any type of way about Notre Dame playing 2 service academies in a single season, or does it not matter to you? Well, it matters to me, but not in the way that I think a lot of you think about it. I have no problem with it. Look, Notre Dame and Army have played in some great historical games. Notre Dame and Navy are a long-time rivalry. I think some of us need to get over this whole stigma about service academies. Army went 6-6 last year. Is playing Army any worse than playing a Power 5 team that went 3-9 or 2-10, or playing a 6-6 MAC team? Like, I have no problem playing Army. They're an AAC team. Navy's an AAC team. Army, this will be their first year in the AAC. I've no problem with it. I mean, Army's had some really good teams lately. I mean, they were down last year, but this is a football team that to me is not that many years removed from being a 9-win football team that beat Missouri in a bowl game, lost to Wisconsin by 6. And that was what 2021 when Army did that. So I have no problem with it. I respect that. I respect that organization. I respect everything about those kids and what they do and what they have to go through to be football players. And I think that for Notre Dame, there's a little bit more to it than just, oh, you played a service academy. There's history there. Like Air Force and Notre Dame, I don't really care as much about that one. Although, and that's not a negative to me, because to me, Notre Dame and Air Force doesn't have the same type of history that Notre Dame and Army have. They don't. They've played almost 30 times, but to me, when I think of Notre Dame and Air Force, I don't think of the same history of rivalries. Why? Because Air Force hasn't been on the schedule as long as Navy. And even though that Notre Dame and Army have played each other something like about 50 times, it's about 20 more than Air Force. There was a time when that was a great game between two great teams. I mean, Air Force has national titles. Now, that happened during the war, but still, I think there's more history there that I like and appreciate than I would playing some random Iowa State or something. Let's get to some more questions here. Some good ones today, folks. I'm enjoying the questions so far. T Gun says, on a scale of 1 to sin, where would you give up? Where would giving up IB for Lent rank? I mean, that is not really something that I can tell you what you need to do, man. I mean, I don't do Lent, so I don't know what that's about. I've never been part of the denomination where that was a thing. Uh, to me, I will say this to you, and I mean this with every ounce of my heart. To me, I think if you feel that there are things in your life that the Holy Spirit, that God is calling you to give up, then you need to give them up, because listening to Irish Breakdown, watching Notre Dame football, your favorite food, whatever the case may be, is not something worth being disobedient to the Holy Spirit. And so I don't know if you're kidding or not, Tommy, but if you, just in case you are serious, man, if the Holy Spirit puts something on your heart, you listen to it, even if it's not something you're necessarily thrilled about, especially if it's not something that you're necessarily thrilled about. But I hope the Holy Spirit doesn't put that on your heart, because I want you to stay and keep watching the show and being part of our community. Anthony Solomon with a question. He says, where in the schedule is Notre Dame? If Notre Dame is undefeated, do you sense a potential deep playoff run? Where in the schedule, if Notre Dame is undefeated, do you sense a potential deep playoff run? So are you saying, like, where would Notre Dame need to get to for me to say, hey, because they're here, they are a team that can make a deep playoff run? I'd probably say after the Virginia game. And the reason I say the Virginia game is because if Notre Dame gets through the Virginia game undefeated, I think they're pretty much guaranteed a playoff spot. The question now would be about positioning. But the other part of it would be, if they can get through that part of the schedule, you've beaten, to me, the best teams on your schedule with USC coming up. You would have beaten, to me, the most talented team on your schedule. You would have had to show that you can bounce back and get your head right the week after having that kind of game. And that would kind of tell me, hey, this team has a chance to make a deep playoff run. The earliest that I would feel comfortable saying that would be the Florida State game. I think until you play Florida State, there's really no talk about how deep of a run could Notre Dame make. Once you play Florida State, you get a better sense, because I think that's the team, to me, that has the best roster stacking up against Notre Dame. And that's something you have to get. And they're a well-coached football team. And that's something I don't think Mike Norvell and his staff get enough credit for. And so we'll dive into that. And as we get after those games, we'll dive more into the whole, hey, because of this, I think that team can make a run. It's a good question, Anthony. Salty Virginia Peanut says, the Irish will play Navy and Army twice in a month in 2024. Will both Florida State and USC following one of those games? Does this represent a scheduling pitfall? I do not believe so. Let's pull the schedule back up again here real quick. Salty, I'm going to take your question down. So when you look at Navy, that's before Florida State, but there's a bye week in between. So, to your question, you said with both Florida State and USC following one of those games, well, they follow, correct, but again, it comes with a bye week. And then after Army, you've got USC. There's no bye week there, but a couple things. Number one, I have said this for years. I've been consistent with it. I think the whole playing triple option teams is way overplayed. Way overplayed. And there was that stat that people that cover Notre Dame used to like to point to, and rightfully so, because the results are the results. I don't think the results were skewed. The results were accurately portrayed. That the week after playing by option teams for a long time, Notre Dame struggled. Well, that changed the last 5 or 6 years. Why? Not because those teams got worse per se, but it was a lot, which Navy actually did. Navy was not a very good team the last few years, but more so about Notre Dame got a lot better. And to me, the reason Notre Dame struggled all those years is because Notre Dame was often not a very good football team. And as I said, I just think the whole playing the triple option thing. Look, I've had to, as a coach, we had a playoff game where we had to play Salisbury one week and they were a triple option team. And the next week had to go play W&J and they were far from an option team. Our defense played lights out that next week against W&J. They played lights out against Salisbury. Our offense is the one that struggled in week 2 in the second playoff game. We only scored 10 points. Now we scored 10 early and jumped on them 10-0, but we are the ones that faltered and cost us that game. It wasn't our defense. I also have some firsthand experience with this, but when you look at Notre Dame over the years and you look at how Notre Dame has played coming to these bye games, when Notre Dame has a good team, it doesn't matter. When Notre Dame has a flawed team, it matters. And so I don't think it has the same impact. This year Notre Dame played Navy, and a week later they played Tennessee State and won 56-3. You look at the year before, Notre Dame plays Navy. They struggle with Navy. They beat Navy 35-32. Navy comes all the way back. A week before playing Navy, they beat Clemson 35-14. The week after playing Navy, they beat Boston College 44-0. Boston College, as you'll remember, was coming off of an upset road win over a then top 20 NC State team. The year before, 2021, Notre Dame plays Navy. A week later, they go on the road to Virginia. It's a pretty decent Virginia team that year. They win 20-3. Go to 2019, Notre Dame plays Navy. They win 52-20. A week later, they host Boston College. They win 40-7. 2018, Notre Dame plays Navy. They win 44-22. The next week, they get no bye. They go on the road and beat a ranked Northwestern team by 10. So there's just no evidence, in my opinion, that when Notre Dame has had a good team, that they struggle to play anybody the next week. So I'm an evidence guy, and to me, there's no evidence from my personal experience, and there's no evidence from what Notre Dame has done the last 5-6 years that playing those teams is a problem. You have plenty of, and sometimes you could even spin it, and I think it is spin, but you could make a case that playing an option team like that can kind of be good for you because it forces your players to be more mentally locked in at a time in the season when maybe you may run kind of into some times where it's like it is getting later in the year. You're coming out of midterms. Guys may lose focus a little bit. This forces you to lock in. And it also, as a potential positive, especially for the Army game, is because you're playing something unique that's going to grab your attention more, there's less chance of you looking ahead. Where if you flipped them and you had, Virginia coming up, maybe you look ahead, you overlook Virginia. When you're playing a team that runs the option, there's less likelihood that you are going to focus ahead because for the defense, because you're thinking about that unique offense. So I just don't think it has the same issues and presents the same problems as it used to. And the reason it used to is because, number one, there was some legitimacy to it because you did for a time have the potential for guys to be not just injured more. I don't know that was necessarily provable, or not. It's provable, but I don't know if that was necessarily proved. But the constant cutting can definitely take a lot out of your lower body. Well, they can't do that anymore. They can't cut like that anymore. And you can't cut on the perimeter like they used to anymore. So it doesn't have the same wear and tear on your body that it used to either. And that's why I just think that we tend to put too much into the whole service academy thing because of the option. And I just don't think it should be that, to be honest with you. I mean, and look, even when you look at Notre Dame and you look at, because I mean, we talk about the option, but remember in 2015, Notre Dame played a Georgia Tech team that was a triple option team. You say, well, the next week they went and played UMass and they won 62-27. And then that same year they played Navy. And then the next week they beat USC 41-31. So, I mean, you could go back a long time and point to issues that this football team has had. And the only year so from 2015 on, the only time Notre Dame has lost or not played relatively well coming after an academy was in 2016. They played Navy and Army back to back, lost to Navy, blew out Army, and then lost home to Virginia Tech next week. I think that was more about that team not being good. And then 2017, they lost to Navy. They beat Navy at home and then went on the road and lost to Stanford. But I don't think anybody would attribute that to me to playing an option team. It was that team just kind of faded and folded a little bit down the stretch. Since then, hasn't been an issue. So good questions there, guys. Very good questions. Okay. Here's a question, Carlos Garza. Why do these schools schedule some opponents like Alabama 10 years in advance? Do you think this will go away soon? Probably not. I think part of it's just having your schedule locked in and trying to have an idea of who you can and can't play. And teams are always trying to be ahead of it. I don't love it. I wish there was a rule that you couldn't schedule more than 2 or 3 years out. That's what I'd prefer. But there's a lot of logistical stuff that goes into it that you need time to prepare for and financially pay for and things along those lines. And, it's like you schedule these deals. The other thing too is the further I schedule a deal, I mean, if I agree to pay, let's say I schedule a deal to pay a Power 5 team to come play us, and the deal is pay them $1 million, and it's 10 years down the road. Unless there are some escalators built into that contract, that dollar amount in 10 years is going to look like a bargain. I mean, that's just the reality of it. I mean, if you could go buy a car 10 years ago, if you could have gone and put say, hey, look, you go to a dealer and say, hey, I'm going to buy in 10 years, I want to buy your 2023 version of this car today at the price for today. That's a heck of a deal now in 2023, isn't it? So I think that's part of it too. Is I would assume that that's part of it, but I think a lot of it just is you don't have a lot of windows, and you want to make sure that your schedule's full. I'm curious how the SEC is talking about going to a 9-game schedule, and I'm curious how many of these games that SEC teams have scheduled, like Florida and Alabama playing Notre Dame, are going to try to get out of when they go to a 9-team schedule. It's going to be very interesting. Okay, T-Guns. When playing NCAA, do you use the stock playbook they give to Notre Dame, or do you create your own? How many different styles of playbooks do you create? Well, it's been 10 years since I played that game, but I always created my own. And I usually only had one. I just kind of would, over time, find the stuff I liked and put it into a playbook, and sometimes make new stuff, which the later games could allow you to do. I don't know if the new one will. That was always fun. But yeah, I usually build a custom playbook. Not take the one that I do. Now, sometimes I would take one for fun. It's like a little bit more of a challenge. If you're trying to not, push yourself a little bit or just it be different, you take another team's playbook and try to win with that. But normally I would customize one. Salty Virginia Peanuts asks, 2025 wide receiver target Jerome Bettis Jr. has been blowing up in both size and recruiting attention. Has he moved up in Brian's estimation? No, he hasn't. I mean, I haven't seen anything from him that makes me want to question my evaluation. But what's changed, Salty, it's a fair question, is once Notre Dame decided they were going to take 4 receivers, I was totally fine taking Jerome Bettis Jr. Because the thing is, right now, I don't believe Jerome Bettis Jr. is a Notre Dame caliber player right now. But number one, the thing you have to look at is there's a lot of size to work with. He's a competitive kid. From everyone that we've talked to that knows him, he's a really good kid that fits well into with what Notre Dame is about. And you have to look at the DNA. I mean, when they first offered Bryce Young, he was not a Notre Dame caliber player either. He became one. Now, Jerome hasn't quite had the jump that Bryce had at the same age, but there's some things to work with there. And because you're going to have the extra room at receiver, I'm good with it, because if you miss, you still have a great, if you miss and he's not as good as you hope he is, you still have a great kid on your team, a hard worker, a kid with some size that understands what Notre Dame is about, and you're going to have a parent who's on board with what Notre Dame's mission is. That's the worst case. I mean, that's your worst case scenario as far as taking Jerome Bettis Jr. That's better to me than the worst case scenario of you not taking Jerome and he goes to Texas A&M or Georgia Tech and the DNA kicks in, and the player that some people think he can be, he becomes in somebody else's uniform. That'd be terrible. Could you imagine like having to watch Jerome Bettis Jr. balling out for somebody other than Notre Dame? That'd make me want to cry a little bit. Not gonna lie to you. So of the two worst case scenarios, I'd much rather take the worst case where he comes to Notre Dame and he's a great kid and a hard worker with a good attitude that maybe is just nothing more than a rotation player. I can live with that. But what Notre Dame is banking on, and what I'm okay with them banking on at 4 receivers, is maybe he's not as good as these guys now, but we think because of some other aspects that he's going to be that kind of player in college. Fine. Totally fine with that. Because at the end of the day, I hope they're right. I would love it if Jerome Bettis Jr. is a way better player than I think he is. I would love it. I tell you guys this all the time. I always like to be wrong if I don't think a kid's that good. And it's especially true when you're talking about a kid of a former Notre Dame player. And so I'm all for taking Jerome, even though my opinion of him has not changed. The circumstances have changed. But when you're talking about a 6'3", 200-pound kid that's as competitive as he is and is the type of young man he is off the field, I'm okay taking a chance on that when you're going at 4. And then if he pans out, you look like a genius and I look like an idiot. And I would love to look like an idiot because of my evaluation of Jerome Bettis Jr. down the road. I do not want to be right about that one. And I'm hoping his senior year is the first step towards fixing that. Tom Connor, who is the best quarterback on the schedule? This is a very, very good question, Tom. Let's pull this up. Let's go to the schedule again. Who's the best quarterback on the schedule? Well, I like Connor Wegman a lot, but he is coming off of an injury. I do think Connor Wegman could be in the conversation by season's end. I don't know if he can be there in week 1. So I'm partly about who they play. The reason I like the Connor Wegman, I think he's a dual threat guy. And I think playing for Colin Klein is going to be a lot better suited to his skill set than playing in whatever Jimbo Fisher was trying to do in recent years. And even Bobby Petrino, who I like, I just don't know that Connor necessarily, his skill set is better suited. He could play in that offense because he's really talented, but it's better suited, in my opinion, for other offenses. Tyler Shuck is a kid with some ability. Stanford, not so much. I really like Haynes King a lot. He's got to limit the turnovers. I mean, that kid had way too many turnovers last year. That was a big issue for him last season. But when he was on, he was a really good football player. I mean, when you just look at his numbers, I mean, he passed for 2,842 yards and 27 touchdowns. He was also second on their team in rushing with 737 yards and 10 touchdowns. You're talking about a kid that, as a first-year starter at Texas A&M, accounted for 3,579 yards, 7.4 yards per play, and had 37 touchdowns last season. Now, the problem is he had 16 turnovers. And when you look at his whole career, turnovers have been an issue for him. If you look at A&M, his first 2 years, 3 touchdowns, 4 picks. His third year, where he got the most starts, 7 touchdowns, 10 picks. So you're talking about a kid that has 10 if I'm doing this correctly, 10 touchdowns and 10 interceptions through his first 3 years. This is a kid that's thrown 26 interceptions already in college. That's a lot of turnovers. If he can limit that and just limit turning the ball over now he's going to his 5th year as a player, he's got a chance to be a really good player for them. So I like Haynes King a lot. Is he their best? I don't know that I would go there. I think DJ Uyunglele for their schedule has got a chance to be that kind of guy. I think he'll fit that system pretty well. I mean, a lot of it's just you got to fit the system, right? I mean, that's really what it boils down to. And I think he'll fit that system relatively well. At Virginia, it's like, who's their quarterback going to be? Is it going to be Anthony Calandria? Is it going to be Tony Muskett? I don't know who their quarterback's going to be. The Calandria kid is an interesting player. He's a good dual threat guy. It doesn't really scare me a ton. Who's going to be the quarterback for USC? I don't know the answer to that. So as I'm looking through the schedule now, my favorite quarterback, the kid that if I could take any quarterback from this schedule to Notre Dame, if Notre Dame had a need, who would that be? It'd probably be Connor Wegman. Do I think he's the best quarterback on the schedule? I'd be more concerned about Connor Wegman if Notre Dame played him in week 10 than week 1. But it's not a great quarterback schedule for where it is right now. But there are some decent, even, Ashton Daniels at Stanford's a decent player. There's some guys on there that are good football players, but nobody that really scares me. It's not like what Notre Dame has played in recent years where they've had to play in the last 2 years. Think about this. In the last 2 years, Notre Dame, when you look at who they've had to play quarterback-wise, has had to play 2 games against Caleb Williams. They've had to play against C.J. Stroud. They've had to play against Drake May, Jaron Hall, Tanner McKee, and they did play against DJ Uyunglele, by the way, a couple years ago. Spencer Rattler in 2023. And I'm just going to go through it this year. Riley Leonard this past season. It's a good quarterback. And so they've had to play some pretty good quarterbacks in recent years, and they've been able to shut them down. And I hope that continues in 2024. Let's get to some more questions here, folks. So you got some really good ones today. I appreciate everybody that put questions in. Let me get caught up here. Let's see here. David Jones, is this a year we will definitely see the kind of chops Joe Rudolph has for the O-line coach? Oh, absolutely, David, because, you look at 2025, that could be a situation where, Notre Dame has got a really good offensive line in spite of coaching, kind of like the 2020 offensive line, where you're just so experienced and so talented that you can kind of overcome not great coaching. To me, offensive line coaches show their chops the most in years where they have the least amount of experience, because that's when it's about your development through and through. Because it's not just about, okay, you got to take 5 talented guys, but having 5 talented guys doesn't mean you're going to have a good offensive line. You've got to make sure that they all know what they're doing. You've got to develop them mentally. You've got to develop their footwork, their technique, their hand play. You've got to get them, last year Notre Dame really struggled with being a team that could drive through contact. They would hit and stop their feet. Can he change that? And when you're dealing with a young group that still has to learn, okay, this is where I'm supposed to be, even little things like I'm normally supposed to be 6 inches from the guard, but on this one play, I got to get down to 5 without going over too much that kind of gives it away. There's all these types of things that you have to learn. And when you're teaching younger players, it's even harder. So to me, if Joe Rudolph can get this offensive line to play at a high level for most of the season, then he answers the question for me, does he have the chops or not? There's no doubt, because if they play really well next year, it could just be that they're so talented and experienced that it just doesn't matter. They won without him. But if he can do it this year, and I'm not asking for perfection. I'm not asking they go out there and dominate all 12 games. That's unfair. I mean, Notre Dame didn't do that on some of their best teams. Their 2017 team didn't do that. And that was the best offensive line of college football by a mile. The 2020 offensive line, which was outstanding, didn't do that every single week. But it's just about, you need to see the progress. The lows need to be higher and the highs need to be more consistent. That's really what you need to see. David Lowe says Gerby Lambert was ranked the 8th best tackle by 247. Is that too low? Yes. And I would always advise you, David, to not pay attention to 247. I don't know how many more times I can tell you that. Jay Wick with a question. Do you think that philosophy is on a position by position basis, Brian? Well, Jay Wick, it depends on what philosophy you're talking about. I'm not quite sure what you're referring to. So if you don't mind following up in the chat with what specific, because I don't know what I was talking about when you put this question in. So if you could please kind of follow up a little bit with what you mean by the philosophy, I would gladly like to answer that question for you. Carlos Garza, Brian, what console will you be playing on? I don't know. I don't have a console right now. I still have the old PlayStation. So I'm going to have to buy a new console whenever the game comes out, which means I should probably go out and get one now don't you think? But I'll ask you guys, what's the best console to play that type of game? I have no idea. I haven't bought a console in over 20 years, so I don't know. That's a good one. I'm all ears. I'm taking suggestions. Taking suggestions. Chief Brody, should Notre Dame go 12-0 against this schedule, or should Notre Dame go 12-0 against this schedule? I mean, should they? No, I don't think they should. Saying they should, can they go 12-0? Yes, they can. Should they? And guys, running the table is not an easy thing to do. It really isn't. And so if Notre Dame goes 11-1, am I like, oh man, this sucks? No. And the thing is 11-1 and 12-0 to me doesn't change Notre Dame's seating a whole lot. It won't. They'll be 5 or 6. They can't be top 4. They'll be 5 or 6 either way. So, I mean, 10-2 to me, I've said is the floor. 10-2 would be progress. 10-2 would not tell me this is it. They've arrived. 11-1 would be a lot closer to that. And of course, 12-0 would be better. But there's a difference between saying they should go 12-0 and they can. Can they go 12-0? Yes, absolutely. Should they? I mean, that's asking a lot. I just care that they get in the playoff. That's when I care about winning every week, more so. But they're capable of it for sure. Dan Benami, am I the only one still having nightmares of the Louisville game and for some reason think they'll do it again? I mean, I don't know. I can't speak for everybody else in the chat, but no. I mean, look, Notre Dame played about as bad as they could play in that game, and I don't expect that to be repeated. I mean, look, did Notre Dame play any worse than that? Was that game any worse than the USC game the year before? No. They came out this year and dominated USC. Notre Dame absolutely obliterated Clemson in 2022. I mean, what Notre Dame did to Clemson was far worse than what Louisville did to Notre Dame. Come out the next year, they got to go to Clemson's place, and Clemson kicks their butt. So that stuff doesn't matter. What they did the year before doesn't matter. It really doesn't. Notre Dame should not have lost to Louisville this year. They shouldn't lose to Louisville next year, but Louisville is a good football team. And one of the questions from Sam S. is, how good is Louisville going to be next year? I think they're still going to be pretty good. I do. I mean, look, they were a good football team this year. I don't care about the bowl game. I thought they competed in the ACC title game against a team that had far better players than they did. The bowl game, as I said, I don't care about the bowl game. I really don't. Let me pull up something here real quick as well, because to me, Louisville's a team that is relying heavily on transfers, which you guys know I have a little bit of an issue with. But there's an exception for Louisville. And that exception is they have a head coach who's proven he can do that. And so, I mean, he's shown that he can kind of fit those new pieces into play. And when you look at what Louisville did in the transfer portal, I mean, they lost a lot of players. They lost their best receiver. I believe they lost their best running back. They lost their quarterback. They lost a lot from their, some players in their defense, but they're bringing in 26 transfers, including some guys I really like. Tyler Barron at defensive end is a really good football player. There's a receiver they got. Let me find this kid's name. Where is he? I always forget his name. It's the kid from no, that's not it. It's the kid from South Alabama. Colin Lacey. That kid's a really good football player. I think he's going to fit in very well at wide receiver. They also got, a kid from Alabama to come in and play wide receiver who's, got some ability, but I'm trying to find the names of all these guys and I can't find it. Let me find it here real quick. Some other guys that they got that I really like. They did get Daya McCullough, who's, it's a solid prospect, but the two kids they got from Tennessee to me at safety are also guys that I like quite a bit, and I'm trying to find their names here. Wesley Walker and Tamorian McDonald are two safeties that played a lot of football for Tennessee, had some starts at Tennessee, were really good football players. I think they're going to help the defense continue to be, a quality defense. But they got Penny Boone at running back, who's a 240-pound kid that rushed for over 1,400 yards last year in the MAC. So I think they did very well in the portal. The big key is going to be Tyler Shuck. Oh, Thor Griffin. Griffith is another player that they got, a D tackle that Ryan and I both like a lot. That was a very good transfer pickup. If Notre Dame would have looked at him, I'd have been happy. Ja'Cory Brooks is the kid. I always get Ja'Cory Brooks and Isaiah Bond mixed up. Ja'Cory Brooks is the other receiver they got there as well. And so to me, they got some good players. They're fitting some good pieces into there. And it's just, can Tyler Shuck stay healthy? Tyler Shuck is far more talented, in my opinion, than Jack Plummer. It's just, can he stay healthy? So I like what Louisville's got next year. I think when you look at their schedule, it's it's a challenging schedule, but it's not one that's just insane when you look at who they have. They play Austin P, Jacksonville State, Georgia Tech at home. At Notre Dame will be tough. Home against SMU. At Virginia, they got Miami at home. Play at BC, at Clemson. That'll be tough. At Stanford, home against Pitt, at Kentucky. So that's a schedule that, if they're the team that I think they can be, that's a 9-10 win team again, potentially. With, in my opinion, would be losses to Notre Dame and Clemson. And then their season is going to be determined by what they do. Number one, avoiding upsets. And then after that, it's between Georgia Tech at home, Miami at home, and at Kentucky. You've got to win two of those three to be a 9-3 team. And if you can pull off an upset over Notre Dame or Clemson and then go 2-1 in those games, you're in the same boat. I mean, you're a 10-2 team. And if you can, run the table against those other teams, and now you're still a 10-2 team. So I like Louisville. I think they're a team that's got some potential. And I just don't see Notre Dame laying an egg the way that they did this year. It's not usually how that stuff kind of works. I then also asked, have we heard anything? Have we heard Snead or Osbury taking some big steps in the past few months? I mean, they're right now it's just weight room work. So it's a little too early for that. We'll find out as we get through the spring and into the summer. Be a better time to learn about those things. Jared Rhodes says, what can Notre Dame do differently against Louisville offensively to avoid another letdown? Is it as simple as the OC change making the difference? Well, no, I mean, the OC change has to be followed by the OC doing a better job of preparing a team, the offensive line doing a better job of preparing a team. The quarterback's got to play better. And you've got to, but the big thing for me, the biggest problem in the game last year was the offensive line. They really struggled in that game. There were some opportunities to take advantage. You've got, I mean, you think about it, you're down 17-10 and you've lost all the momentum. You drop back and you run a little bit of a trick play. It's a great play call by Jared Parker. You run a little, fake screen, stutter, go with Mitchell Evans. Sam Hartman lost it. Boom, hits him right in stride. You get the ball deep in Louisville territory. You got all the momentum back. Penalty. Illegal hands in the face by Blake Fisher. Bring it back. Louisville had just I think they had just taken a lead. I think it was No, it was coming out of halftime. I'm pretty sure. Let me pull the play-by-play up, because I think it was that you're coming out of halftime and you force a fumble. It's a 7-7 ball game. You have really struggled in that game. Let me pull this play-by-play up, because I'm pretty sure it was on the first drive of the second half. So let me go here. You got end of half. Yes, they come out of the half, and you're 3rd and 6 at the 35-yard line. It's a 7-7 ball game, and they call a play, wide fade to Chris Tyree. Sam underthrows him a bit, but it still hits him in the hands. Chris drops it. So instead of going up 14-7 and just silencing that crowd, Notre Dame settles for a field goal and just doesn't really gain the momentum. Louisville goes down and ties it up 10-10. And there just were so many missed opportunities in that game for Notre Dame to just take control, and they played terrible. And so I don't see Chris Mitchell and Bo Collins and Jaden Greathouse getting out muscled for footballs the way that Rico Flores did early in that game. I just think this is a better football team at those skill positions. You have a quarterback now that can do more damage against that type of pressure. You can hurt Louisville more for the aggressiveness that they showed against you than you could last year, even if the offensive line doesn't play better. At the end of the day, that's going to be the big key, is the offensive line is going to have to play a lot better than it did against Louisville last year. I mean, for all the talk about the defense play, they give up 7 points in the first half. That's it. And Louisville scored on some very short fields in the second half. If you go down and if you go look at that game, they had a field goal drive that covered a total of 7 yards. They had another field goal drive that covered -4 yards. They had another field goal drive that covered 8 yards. I'm just kind of doing the math here real quick. Their last 3 scoring drives covered a grand total of 11 yards. That kind of stuff matters. You take those away, it's 24-20 with how bad Notre Dame played. So Where you get concerned about games like that, Jared, because it's a very fair question, is if one of two things is true. Number one, you have a history of performances like that, which I don't know that you could even say Notre Dame does the last couple of years. It would just kind of pop up weirdly. It wasn't a consistent history of it. And then number two is if that opponent has a unique matchup advantage against you. And I don't think that's true either. Like we said it all offseason. Now, I'm not saying Notre Dame should have lost to Clemson, but we said all offseason, look, they're not going to just repeat what they did in 2022. It doesn't work like that. Clemson's going to be prepared to stop that. It's a different team. Both teams are different. Just because Notre Dame hosted Clemson in 22 and kicked the crap out of them doesn't mean that it's just automatically going to repeat next year. It's not how football works if there's somewhat comparable teams. So if anything, the way that Louisville beat Notre Dame last year is going to be bad for Louisville because it means Notre Dame is going to be very aware of that game and very pissed about that game. So if anything, if you're Louisville, you kind of maybe wish you didn't have that kind of result last year, in my opinion. And Mitchell Evans did not go down against Louisville. He got hurt against Pitt. T. Smith 0323. How would you feel about the Broncos taking Bo Nix in the draft? Well, to me, Denver needs a quarterback, right? Of the guys on the board, he's probably the one they have the best chance at sitting at 14. They're at 12. I don't see Drake May or even Jaden Daniels getting there. I'd rather have Bo Nix and Jaden Daniels, to be honest with you. And I like Jaden Daniels a lot, but I just don't know how his game is going to translate, and I'm concerned about his body holding up at the next level. I think as great as Jaden Daniels was this year, we can't ignore the fact that it was his 5th season starting, and I don't know how well that's going to translate, to be honest with you. But look, if you're going to have to take a quarterback in the first round, I'd be okay with Bo. I mean, you have to understand there's an adjustment you're going to have to make with him going from the system he ran to the new one. But I wouldn't be completely opposed to it. I mean, if you could trade down a few spots and get some picks and still get him, that'd be awesome. But I don't know that I would. I don't know that I'd be opposed to that. And the other part of it too is like, what's on the board? I mean, if there's a great pass rusher, you need a pass rusher. If there's a great corner, if there's some stud receiver, I mean, there's other needs that Denver has that if that guy's there, do you take a quarterback that maybe grades much lower than one of those guys? No, you don't. And then maybe you can hope that you can get one in round 2 or round 3 or something like that. But I'd be okay with it. He wouldn't be like the top guy on my board, but if they took a quarterback there, I mean, that's a need you have. And it would be a sign that they're rebuilding a little bit, which they are. They need to do. So I'd be okay with it. I'd be okay with it. And then Jay Wick followed up and said, referring to his previous question about that you asked about, do you think the philosophy is a position by position basis? He's referring to playing the younger guys who are equally talented as an older guy, but potentially more flawed. No, I didn't say equally talented. That's not it at all. If you're playing two guys if you have two guys that are equally talented, and the older guy knows the system more, then you play the older guy. It's if the older guy knows the system better and the younger guy is more talented and the gap between the talent is greater than the gap between the system, then you play the younger guy, in my opinion. That's what I'm saying. So, like, if you have a young guy that's super talented, but he doesn't know what he's doing, you don't play him. You play the veteran. What I'm saying is if you have a veteran that knows what he's doing and you have a younger guy that somewhat knows what he's doing, but the talent gap is pretty big, then you play the younger guy because the only thing lacking is experience. But if you don't ever play him, he can't get that experience. If it's close in talent and one guy knows the system better, then you play the guy that knows the system better. My scenario, Jay Wick, just so we're clear, refers to situations where I don't think the talent is the same. So, for example, I don't think that Pat Coogan and Billy Schrauth are on anywhere close talent-wise. That's why I thought he should have played last year more. It'd be a little different if we're talking about Billy Schrauth against Jarrett Patterson, because Jarrett's also talented and more experienced. So it's a little bit of a different situation for me. So that's why just want to make sure we're clear. And so the philosophy that I do have to me would be something that would translate to all positions. I think that should be true to every position. If things are somewhat close with knowledge of the system and one guy is definitely more talented, then you play the guy that's more talented. That's certainly what I believe. All right, that's going to do it for today's show, everybody. Lots of great questions. I enjoyed it very much. Appreciate y'all's patience with that little stumble that I had right there in the middle. Sorry about that, but we'll get that. No more mistakes like that. We'll get this thing rocking and rolling here moving forward. We'll be back tomorrow. It'll be Ryan and Sean tomorrow at 1 o'clock for a Notre Dame recruiting hour. Sean Davis and I'll be back on Saturday for an RTCF show. We're still putting the topics together for that. So that'll be another fun show. So we got lots planned. And then, of course, Ryan and I will be back next Monday for another mailbag. So have a great rest of your Thursday, everyone. Hit that like button on your way out. Hit the subscribe button. Hit the notification bell. Share this podcast with all your friends, not just sharing it with the share button. It helps us grow and helps us kind of with the algorithm, but also tell people about it. Word of mouth is how we advertise. And then if you have not done so, I'm just going to throw this challenge out now. If you have not signed up for the message board and you've at least thought about it, or you want to support Irish Breakdown, give it a try. Sign up for a monthly membership, annual membership, whatever the case may be. Just give it a shot. Give us at least through the spring practice. And I think you guys are going to really like the intel that we bring, the breakdowns that I have planned, the conversation that we have. There's a lot of stuff that we have planned that I think you're really going to like. And so if you haven't done so, I'm telling you, I'm just challenging you. If you like Irish Breakdown, you like what we're about, you like the intel that we offer here, sign up for the message board. Give us at least from now through spring, which is April 20th, to see what we have, to see what we have to offer, to see the different things we do. And I don't think you're going to be disappointed at all. So I think the people that have signed up really like it and stick with us. And that's why we've been able to grow the way we have in a very, very short period of time. So give it a whirl. Boards.irishbreakdown.com. As Jason Smith said, it's the best money you'll spend each month. I agree. Thank you very, very much for that. All right. Have a good one, everybody. We'll talk to you again here very soon on the Irish Breakdown podcast.